It could also take in a whole lot of additional information that we'll see along the line as well, and provide some additional steps. It actually has a lot longer background than you realise. It started life as a commercial program, Mike Roberts, about the end of the 1900s. And he was selling it for quite a few years, I think 4 or 5 years. He developed it and then decided there wasn't that much money in it, I guess, or for some reason or another, he's released it to the public, which he did at the end of 2004 as version 3. Didn't engender a lot of interest at the time, but probably a couple of years later, a group of banana-based programmers, John Warrington was the lead one, I think, but also Rob Dunning and Scott Penrose took up the program, and they started to develop it very actively and continued to do so through to about 2009, by which stage it had really, people were starting to take notice, and it developed quite a large international user base. Because of this, a lot of, and it's an open source program, a lot of other people started to come into it, and was gradually taken over by a European-based group of programmers. Max Bellerman was the main one, but Paolo Ventafrida and Tobias Bennick have also been fairly well involved over the years. And they continued to develop it, putting in an awful rapid rate of development. There were major updates being coming down every 2 or 3 months. And this was at a stage where you had to manually load it onto your device. It wasn't something that happened automatically. So keeping up with it was quite an issue. I think it was around about, be around about 2012, I think. There was Max decided that they were going to change from Visual C, which had been developed on, to a programming group, GNU compiler group, which had the advantage that it would open up the device for a whole series, open up the program for a whole series of devices, not just the Windows Mobile that had been running on at that point in time. Now, this stalled development while all this porting across was done. So for about 12 months, there was no development, and led to a fracturing of the group that had been developing it. Paolo Ventafrida went off and subsequently developed LK8000, which is another very capable final glide computer, similar in many respects. He wasn't too keen on the idea of waiting around so it could go on to Androids and other things. Interestingly, I noticed he subsequently has ported his program across as well, so he would have had to go through a similar time of stalled development while that was happening. Now, let's have a look. Being released under a public license, it has the advantage that there's no cost for the actual program. There can be a cost for the media that it's shared on, or for services associated with it, like setting it up or things like that. There is still a fairly enthusiastic team of developers who will continue to develop the program and respond to problems that arise and bugs and new possibilities as we develop new input devices. It's got the advantage that it's a very highly configurable feature-rich program. And unfortunately, that's also one of its disadvantages, because it does lead to a bit of confusion with people when it comes to setting it up. Cons, I don't think there are any great cons. I think it probably develops better than most of the commercial programs these days. You often think of freeware stuff as being poorer quality, but in reality, I think it's up there with all the rest of the programs, without doubt. Now, because of the requirements for free distribution under the general public license, it contradicts the iPad and the iPhone philosophy, and for that reason they can't port it onto an iPad or an iPhone. So don't hang out for it. It's probably not going to happen. The last one of these talks I gave would have been 4 years ago. I think the first one was 4 years before that. At the stage of the last talk, there was still an awful lot of rapid development going on. New features were being developed. Really, since then, things have slowed down a lot. There is still a reasonably active group of developers in the background going on, but most of the work at this stage has been done by as bug fixes or support for operating system updates and development for new, more novel platforms, as we'll see. It's a fairly mature program, and the ability to develop more features on it's probably a little limited at this stage.
You'll be able to do it because it's big.
Yeah, it operates on a whole series of operating systems. I've rearranged these a bit. The Android is probably the one most people will fly with, certainly the easiest one to use. Windows, very good to learn how to use it. A bit limited when it comes to putting a Windows computer in your cockpit. E-ink readers, your things like your Kindles and these type of things. Most of them don't have GPS built into them. They don't have Bluetooth connections, so they're fairly limited in that regard. So people wonder why you want to use them, but the simple reason is that they've got very good daytime visibility. It's only black and white, but is excellent. The brighter the light, the better the visibility of the screen. They do have some disadvantages still. They're black and white only. The screen can tend to be a little bit sluggish, so you get a bit of smearing when the screen's changing rapidly. They've got an excellent battery life. You don't need to worry about an external power supply with an e-ink one. You just charge it up and it'll run for a week. But it does require, they're not simple to set up. It requires basically breaking open the device, patching in GPS signals, maybe actually calling routing the operating system, knobbling the operating system so you can force it to load up your program rather than the inbuilt one. At the moment, it's also being developed for the single board, the Raspberry Pis and the Arduinos and those type of things. I'm not sure exactly what the place of that's going to be at the moment. I don't see it being used on aircraft at the moment, but it's easy enough to do and it's being done. The ones on the right there really are history. It is able to be run under Unix, under a Debian system. The Windows Mobile series which is what it originally ran on, these little compact devices and personal computers, the portable little computer things, PDAs, personal digital assistants. At the moment, it's still being ported into those operating systems, but with the development of version 7, which is going on in the background at the moment, those Windows systems are going to be lost. I'm not really surprised because I don't think anyone uses them anyway. Windows Mobile 7 was the development of Windows Phone Edition, which is the current Windows version that goes on a phone. Again, I don't think I've ever seen one, but it's not capable of running under that in any form. Windows CE, or Windows Compact Edition, is a version of Windows that runs on things like navigators, where it's just loading a custom program. And certainly there was quite a few of those in use early in the piece. The HP 314 was a popular one because it had a good screen. Again, I can't see anyone likely to be looking at using that. The screen resolution, they're small, they're slow, the power of them is low compared to a modern Android.
Hi, Jeff. Could I ask a question?
Yep.
Look, you may not know, but I happen to have a Aldi Go Cruise Navigator computer here, an old one. I don't know if you've got any links to sort of tell me how to get into the user interface so I can sort of swap the program from the Navigator to the XCSoar.
Typically, you'll find there's and I don't know with this one particularly, they typically run on a SD card with the program all on that. Somewhere in there will be a file that will tell the computer operating system what it loads. Now, it'll be an auto-run file of some form or another.
Right.
What you'd have to do is get onto the web and search on how to do it on that particular device. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you do it, when you change the card, you have to reboot the system every time. You don't just plug the card back in and turn it on. That'll corrupt it. The device actually seems to keep addresses to specific addresses on the card, and if you just pull the card out, make some modifications to the files, plug it back in and turn it back on, you'll corrupt the card. What you need to do is reboot the device from scratch. But look, without, I don't know the device particularly, but that's the general way in which it's done. Do you know if it runs under Windows CE, Compact Edition?
Yeah, it's got Windows CE, yeah.
Yeah, well, that'd be the normal way that it's done. But it's a matter of searching the web and finding out how to do it.
Thanks.
Right. I'll stop share here. Start share. And right. Switched across now to web browser and go through the various ways of getting the various files that you'll need. XCSoar runs its own, has its own website, and you'll find most of the stuff you need is available there, and xcsoar.org. Don't worry about these URLs. I've certainly got a listing of them all that I can give you at the end of the day. This stage, I presume you're seeing the XCSoar website.
Yes.
Thank you. The manual, it's got the new version number written on the front of it. Can't see that it's that much different from version 8, which I've been working from, 6.8.8. Most of the references to it, including the dates included in it, refer to around about 2013 and 14. I think they have caught up a few of the things that were behind, but large sections of it are still sitting back a few years ago. But as I said, there hasn't been a lot of development of the program in the last few years anyway. So where they have been fixing up is just catching up some of the stuff that was behind in the past. If you tick the download program, you'll bring data here, and there's the various options for downloading the actual program file. Now, as far as the Android's concerned, you can download an APK file, which is the actual program file. I seem to recall doing that early in the piece, but I don't think it was on Google Play at that stage. But these days, I can't see any reason that you wouldn't just go to Google Play and do it there. So we might do that, and that brings you up to Google Play with XCSoar. This one here, the blue one with Max Kellerman's name, is the active, stable, current version. That's the one that you really want to be downloading. The version here is testing version. In theory, looks as though it's meant to be the beta testing one. But having a look into it, it looks as though it was sitting back at about version 12. In fact, I think it's an old one that's still sitting there. TE is Tobias Bennick, one of the developers version. He's done put in some fancier drivers for other devices like the LX1600 screen or the Volkslogger it can talk to. He's also got fancy Flam screens. Again, unless you've got a reason for it, I don't see any reason for going for that one. XCSoar Narrowgen was a version that was put in by Peter Bradshaw for updating the keyhole tasks before they became generally available on XCSoar anyway. So again, these days it's out of date. Top Hat Soaring is Rob Dunning's version of XCSoar, and it has some supposedly a simpler interface. He's changed the interface and make it look a little bit easier. It self-configures a bit. If you tell it which country you're in, then it'll basically get rid of the rules that aren't necessary for you and sets up the units and things like that. He's also done a lot of the work involved in running it on the e-ink readers, the Kobo and the Nook, and his website has more explicit instructions on what you need to do to be able to run it on one of those devices. So people are interested in looking at doing that. And interestingly, I don't know if Wayne's here. I think Wayne actually has a version that runs on a e-ink reader. So for those people that think he's technically a dinosaur, you might be very surprised to learn that. He's also only did that after his compacts would no longer work. The other version, I guess, LK8000 will be around here somewhere too. Which, yeah, I can't see it. Oh, there we are. The Paolo Benedicto, I think, was the original branch of that one. I think there's a number of people involved in developing it. And a lot of people feel that's very much comparable to XCSoar. But it is a different interface and does require a little bit of learning to change across to it. If you go to the XCSoar download site, then that's what you'll see. You do that in your Android and it will download itself and load it and install itself onto your Android directly. It does ask for a few permissions, which people get a bit alarmed about. It does need location, obviously. It needs to know where it is. Photos, medias, and files. It needs to be able to write a log file, a recording to your USB storage, so it needs access to there. It needs network connections because it uses Bluetooth, connect across to things like farms or fancier Varios. It needs to be able to turn off the power control because it needs to be able to make sure it doesn't black out as you're running it, so it's on the whole time, and turn off vibration and things like that. It does ask for access to your personal log file access, and that's basically so it can write a crash log in the event of having problems in that regard. Now, once you've got the program downloaded, then there's quite a few data files that you need. And the first one is a waypoint file. You can't run XCSoar without it. It's about the only file it does need. Oops, where are we? You go to the term point exchange, it's what you see to start with. You go down to turn points, Australasia. And this was one that a series of turn points that put up.
Sorry, for those that aren't familiar with it, Jeff's navigated to a website where any glider pilot can go to get the turn point file for any site in the world. And it's
run in the States by a fellow called John Liebecker. He must have set up quite a bit of software over there because you can feed him a file in virtually any format and he'll convert it across. So you can actually have a look here and see, in this case on the map, say, have a look at it and it'll plot all the turn points, in this case, that I have loaded into that particular database, just so I can give you an idea of what's actually there. What you would need to do is go to this files formatted for downloading and import it into your program, which will give you turn point files in whatever format you like. So you can see here, the format that natively XCSoar uses is the DAT data file, DAT, which is the same as Cambridge or WinPilot. In fact, is the same down the bottom here. It's the same format. But XCSoar will use quite a variety of turn point data. CU here has additional information in it regarding landing points and airstrip lengths and orientations and so on, which if you download it in that format, that'll get incorporated and used by XCSoar. So it's not a bad way to download your turn point files as well. The XCSoar's website itself, if you go to Waypoint Downloads, It'll download files basically from all over the world. It has a series of made up turn points for each country. And looking there, I see they're in cup format, which is CU's format. This is actually data from an organisation called Welt 2000. It was a German project that was running back, as the name implies, around 2000. Unfortunately, it's no longer being updated. And from what I can see, most of the listings there, well, they certainly haven't been uploaded in the last 10 years or so, updated in the last 10 years or so. I guess with waypoints to a large degree, it doesn't matter, but but it is old data there. It's there these days. A lot of clubs will list data on their websites. So this is a page from Geelong's website for its Paul camp. And down here we have various packages of data in various formats for the various devices. It's worth looking at your own websites and seeing what are available there. Camps will often, not camps, competitions will often have their own data that's used. So this is in fact the Orange Week over in South Australia. Interestingly, they just have a link to the Turn Point Exchange anyway. With the data files, they're all basically ASCII files. They're just in text anyway. And it's quite easy to open them up and have a look in them, and you'll recognise most of what's there. And you can add your own entries if you only have 2 or 3 points you need to put in, modify them, just looking at what's in there and mimicking the data that's already in there.
The traditional way really to get your files is you send an email to someone like Jeff or me or Mike Durant and say, can you send me all the files I need for my XCSoar setup, and you'll get an email.
Yeah. The XCSoar program actually has in it a download option, but that goes back to the XCSoar website, and it's the Welt 2000, which, as I said, these days are a little bit out of date. The next lot of data that's well worth getting is, oops, I lost my is special use airspace or airspace files. They're extremely useful and highly recommended that you get these. These files basically outline all the airspace and their parameters, and they can be used to the regular airspace, but they can also be used to add wave windows and things like that in, so you can see whether you're in the appropriate area when you're trying to use them. There are 2 common formats. They're basically text formats, Open Air and the Tim Newport piece format. And again, XCSoar will accept either of them. If you go to this is the Turn Point Exchange, again, we're back at with the airspace. And if you go to the airspace here, for Australia, it has various combinations of airspace in both the formats. As I said, either one's available. This all actually comes from a mob called Cross Country Australia, which is this mob. And they're a hang glider thing, a bit like the OLC, where the hang glider pilots put their flights up and run a competition. But part of the website is it actually runs, it's responsible, or it's the best site for getting the downloads of up-to-date airspace. They're the ones that actually do it. And the Turn Point Exchange just takes their files from here. They come out twice a year, May and November. And these are open air format, which is fine. You can download them in terms of the individual classes of airspace, which would be a bit of a pain, or all classes. But again, you'd have things like having CTAFs marked with 3,000 foot ceilings, or get rid of some of the radio boundaries, things like that. That's where I'd normally get mine from, because that's where you'll get the most recent up-to-date files. If you do a search on the various formats, it's easy enough to find how to write files in the appropriate format. So this is open air format, and if you go through it, it'll explain how to write up your own files. Now, you wouldn't want to be doing it on a countrywide basis, but when it comes to things like the wave windows over the Grampians, it's not that difficult to do. So you can do it if you want to by going and looking up the format and just find the syntax. So it'll be something like a name, an upper and lower ceiling. In the case of a wave window, it'll be a center point for a radius and then a radius. And that's all there is to it. Now, the next map that's worth, the next file that's worth getting is the maps. And again, there are a whole lot of maps that are available from the XCSoar website itself. You can go there. They're all made up by country. If you go into the various countries, where are we? So Australia, Adelaide, Bedallen, New South Wales, Victoria, standard or high resolution. LTER is a in-glider device that XCSoar has been closely associated with over the years. Scott Penrose has been mainly responsible for it, and it only runs XCSoar. But unfortunately, I suspect with the new version coming along, it'll run a compact edition version. I'm not sure whether it'll continue to be supported in the future. But that's one of the, I presume, multi-$1,000 devices that you can fit inside your glider. As far as I'm concerned, the best way to get a map is just make your own. So you can go to the XCSoar map generator. It does seem to be a bit kludgy. In theory, you put in a name for a map. You put in your email so that it can send you a link when your map's ready and you can download it. You can ask for various levels of detail. The topography in the map, every little village up to only major cities, roads and railroads. In Australia, the detail's so sparse anyway that I'd leave it on every little village and road that we know of. You can select bounds by hand. Now, you do that by drawing on this map down here, but I find that doesn't work. I keep away from it. What I tend to do is generate a waypoint file of the area I want to cover. I choose that file, So say back as March data, load it up, and then generate. Yeah, map bounds.set, it's going to play up. You will find it does this frequently. I have done a few during the week and managed to get them to go through. If you keep trying at it, it will work eventually. You can choose to include the waypoints out of the XCSoar's database. As I said, they're probably a bit out of date these days. You can have high resolution terrain. That'll make a much bigger file, but useful in the mountains, not so useful on the flatlands. Compressed topography in the days where the file sizes were relevant with the memory that was available, probably useful, but these days I wouldn't bother. Yeah, sure why it didn't work that time, but anyway, so it's not going to work now. I don't know if do I need to put it in an email? I don't think you do.
No, you just need to select that you're using waypoints.
Sorry?
You need to select you're using waypoints, not bounds by hand.
Ah, yeah, I do too. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to work today. Now, what other files can you get? Flam files. Basically, if you have your XCSoar connected up to a Flam, you can have it name the glider when you have a Flam alert come up. It'll give you the registration of the glider that's involved. There's XCSoar itself has a file you load, xcflam.txt, that can have up to about 200 entries in it. But you have to set that one up by hand. I have got an awful lot of the Flam codes from around Bacchus Marsh, and I can provide one if people are really after it. There is an organisation called flamnet.org, which is XCSoar's, not XCSoar's, Flam's officially approved database of Flam. You could go and register your Flam there, and when you have, you can download the data for XCSoar. It's down the bottom here, data.fln, and that will include all the gliders in the world that have actually put themselves on that database. There are about 11,000 of them at the moment. The Open Glider Network also runs a Flam registration, which has got about 19,000 devices on it at present, but unfortunately they don't have the option of letting you have the data to be able to put it into your device. And back, there's things called waypoint files, waypoint detail files. These are files which expand in the detail on the various waypoints. So they're very useful for airfields, where you can put in the details of CTAFs and Unicoms, the various entries out of URSA, warnings as to what's operating there and requirements as to whether you can go there or not. The various strips, services and lengths and all the rest of it, specific procedures. Unfortunately, there isn't a source on the web where you can really download that type of stuff. You can make up your own. It's a fairly simple format. as listed here. I maintain a database of about 4,000 turn points around the country, and I can generate them quite readily for anyone that wants them. But the only problem is mine will be referenced back to the names I've got for the turn points in my waypoint files. They won't reference back if yours uses different names for those turn points. You'd have to go through and edit it. So turn point databases. Polder files. The XCSoar has a the performance data and polder files for an awful lot of gliders built into it. These days, it's pretty unlikely that you need to create your own. And if you do, you can actually get the data and feed it into XCSoar, and effectively you'll have exactly the same as loading it by file anyway. Cumulus soaring used to have a good listing of data for various waypoints, for various gliders. Unfortunately, that's no longer on their website, but I did just put it into the Wayback Machine and extracted that lot the other day, so you can still get at it, but it's a little bit more complicated than it used to be.
Hi there, Jeff.
Sorry?
Just on the basis of trying to generate your own polar, that's something I might want to do because the woodstock with the engine stuck on top probably is not going to be represented by anything much I can find in the waypoint by the polar file. So I've got to degrade something or create one.
You basically need the gross dry weight, the maximum ballast, which is fairly simple, I guess, on a woodstock. Well, you could account for the fuel, I guess. Then you're going to need 3 speed sig coordinates to create a polar. You convert those into meters per second and kilometers per hour and feed it into XCSoar, but you're going to have to somehow or another either approximate, measure what they actually are. You'll need to feed in wing area. They're the mandatory data that you need. Optional data is wing area and manoeuvring speed, so that the computer doesn't command you to go into ridiculous speeds with the thing. But if you could get that data, you can just feed it in yourself and you've got your polar. Right. Now, what I was going to do is just basically can I share my desktop?
I think you can, Jeff. I think there's a function called share all when you go to share.
Screen, whiteboard, iPhone, iPad, PowerPoint, Cumulus. Just attendees.
Maybe there isn't. I'm sorry.
Advanced. Portion of screen. I wonder how that works. Right, you should see file manager there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Once you've got all these files, I'll just set it up quickly on this computer for Windows. and just show you how it's all done. So in this case, I'd need to go into Program Files for Windows. That's the 64, and create a directory, XCSoar. Is what I'll call it. I also need to go into Documents and create a file, XCSoar data. Now those files that you've downloaded, you've been busily getting, so XCSoar Windows, the program file, you run across, you carry across to the program file directory. And the additional data files that you've collected, your maps and all the rest of it, you copy across to your XCSoar data file. We go back to XCSoar, the program, and try running it. We'll probably get some warning here, Windows protected your PC, don't run. We want more info and run anyway. Now, if I go back to stop share and share screen, is XCSoar available as a rightio? You're seeing XCSoar now?
No, yes, we are.
Rightio. So the first time you run it, you'll this is the opening screen that you'll see. There's two options, or there's three options. One's to quit. The other two options are fly or sim. Basically, fly, it will connect into your GPS, whatever you set up for it. Whereas with simulator, it won't connect to your GPS. So first time around, you just run sim. Now, because we haven't configured it, it's all a rather boring looking screen at the moment. You've got the map area in the front, in the middle here, and then on either side, you've got various info boxes that you can set up. Which is what you've got to do when you first go in there. First, if you, in the case of Android, you double click one of the info boxes, or in the map screen, if there's nothing there, you'll come up with the menus. And in this case, you choose config. And the first thing you have to configure is your device, because that's where you're getting your GPS from. Now, in this case, it's running on a Windows computer. I don't have a GPS attached to it. If you're running Android, you would probably have the option of inbuilt GPS sensors, and you could choose that one. You could also have various Bluetooth options available too. If you have a FLAM set up nearby, you have the Bluetooth set up, if you have Bluetooth fed from that FLAM, or Bluetooth from something like an S7 or an S8, then that'll appear here and you can choose that. The first one that you choose is the one that XCSoar will choose by default. If the other isn't, if it can get to it. And in the case of a Flam, or the case of the S7, the GPS engines in those are going to be far better than what you're going to have sitting in your phone. So you're better off choosing the external source as option one. It doesn't matter if later on you go in there and you don't have the Bluetooth turned on. It'll then go to and default to your selection B. But the thing here is to put the internal phone GPS lower on the list than you put the more accurate ones. So you connect that up. You go back, double click again, configure, choose configuration again, configuring the device. And this time you choose system. The first thing you need to set up are the site files. So choose site files, I'll add expert, which basically opens up further options. The map database, in this case, I've got Res Southeast Australia. That contains both terrain, the height shading, if you like, and topography, all the roads and towns and lakes and things like that are all built in there. The XCM file is actually just a zip file. If you change the extension to zip, you can open it with any zip file and have a look at what's inside. Sometimes some computers, when you download it, some browsers will convert it to a zip file and save it as a zip file. Again, if it does that, just change it to XCM and it'll work fine. As I said, you've got download here, and that'll actually take you into the ones that are coming off the Welt 2000, as I mentioned before. So choose that one. Waypoints. I've got waypoints in cup format, so Southeast Australia turn points. You've got space there for a second one. Normally that would be used, for instance, if you're going to a competition and there's a local competition file. Rather than getting rid of all of yours, you can just add in the competition file. As long as you know that both are going to be shown and they're not going to conflict. If you've got two different definitions for banana airfield, then it might be worthwhile sticking to the one that's for the competition. In my case, I have a series of fairly derelict landing strips that could be used in extremitas, so I put those in there. Watched waypoints is a file a bit like the airport text one. It can list specific turn points in there where the XCSoar will do extra calculations on it. It will actually put labels on it as to what height you're going to cover it, reach it, and things like that. So useful for things like passes in the mountains where you want to know whether you can get through the next pass or not. You could have those listed in a file. I haven't got any put in there at the moment specifically. They've all just gone in under the turn point file at the moment, so I won't bother. Airspaces. Again, I've just used the Australian airspace, the 2000 May 20. That's the latest one that downloads from XCSoar. in more airspaces, I might shove the Grampians wave windows, which wouldn't be included in the Australian airspace. Waypoint details is the airport airfield extra information that can be included. You put that under there. So you go through, you do all those. Suppose we should have set up your plane first of all too, but anyway. What I'm going through here are really the pretty basic ones that you need to set up. Task defaults, look, setup. So go down to setup and logger. You need to put your name in there. So GGC's pilot. You can leave most of the other things on default. Logger ID is a name that gets incorporated into the file name. The official FAI file name allows three letters for that. So I just put XCSoar, but you can put anything you like, but it'll become the letters that appear in the log file of the name of it. Going back again, next one you need to set, if I actually go back to, so setup logger is units, and fairly simple. Australia is fairly unique, so if you set Australia, it'll set everything up there. Now, if we close it at this point, it will go through and load up all this stuff, so that when you next get into it, it looks more like a XCSoar normally would look. There's still a bit of more setting up to do though. So you choose a part of the map where there isn't any feature and double click it. Go back to systems, map display, airspace. The main thing here you want to set is how the airspace shows up. If you have all on, then everything above you right up to area class A will be on. Clip basically selects everything below a certain atom below your level. The auto uses everything below your level plus immediately above. Everything below your level. Clip is everything that comes on within a certain threshold, a certain height from you. Auto comes on as you go into it. All below is clip. Everything below plus anything you're going to come into within the threshold. And that's the one I tend to use, but everyone could have their own. Safety factors. Glide computer safety factors needs to be set. The important ones here is arrival height. That's the height you want to be by the time you get back to the airfield. So various people have different ideas. Some people want to be there at 1,000 feet so that they have enough for the circuit. Must admit, I tend to put it at 0 feet and work on the basis that I know I have to allow enough extra to be able to have the height to do a circuit. Terrain height is the minimum height that it will cross, that you will be crossing terrain. So if you've got saddles that you're crossing, it say you can't get through until you've got a certain amount of clearance, including, in fact, your final airfield. It'll say that, but it'll still give you the correct amount on the when it indicates. So I tend to select about 500 for that. Safety McCready. The minimum, you want to have a bit of McCready in reserve so that you can really, if things turn to shit, you've just got a little bit below you that you can rely on. You don't put your base McCready down at 0 and have nothing sitting there. Everyone can have their own choice as to what they use for safety McCready. One's usually regarded as reasonable, 1.5, something like that. Is what I normally set it. And speed to fly risk factor. Basically, you'll have a speed to fly band, say 3,000 to 10,000 feet, and it will command you to fly at a certain speed. If you're pretty confident, then you can make it command you to fly at that speed all the way down to the bottom of that band. That'd be a speed to fly risk factor of 0. If you're extremely conservative, you can say that, well, at 10,000 feet, I'll fly at that speed, but decrease it linearly as we go down through that band. That'd be a speed to fly risk factor of 1. A speed to fly risk factor of 0.4, say, would mean that it commands you to fly at full speed down to the bottom 40% of the speed to fly band. But in that bottom 40%, it'll literally decrease the speed it commands you to fly. So you can put things in there. If you believe your manufacturer's polar, you can agree to it. If your gel coat's getting a bit cracked and you thought the manufacturer was a bit optimistic to start with, then you can put down a degradation factor. So 20% would mean it would add 20% to all of the sync readings that it's getting from the manufacturer's polar or from the polar that you put in. That's probably the main ones that you'd want to be setting up in that area. They're probably these days the most important ones. If your phone isn't that powerful, or you might want to change some of the route settings. This is the thing that works out how far you can go. Basically, the simplest setting is it'll try in each direction directly away from you till it either hits the ground or it hits a hill or something, and says that's as far as you can go in that direction. If you wanted to get a bit more complicated, it can start turning around corners in terrain or corners in airspace, so that, yeah, it hits the hill here, but now if you go to the right of the hill and then come around behind the hill, it will work out how far you can go behind the hill. But that takes a hell of a lot more computing power to be doing that type of stuff. So it's going to be slowing down the number of readings you're getting per second. If your phone's up to it, put it on. If it makes it run too slow, turn it off. The reach mode, similar type of thing, basically. The simplest things are straight. If you're allowing it to turn, then that'll increase the computing. The other one that's probably worth thinking about is terrain. And this really comes down more to contrast of the screen. None of the devices we have these days have wonderful, apart from the e-ink displays, have wonderful bright visibility in bright conditions. And when you have the terrain on, it looks very nice, but it does decrease the visibility of things on the actual display. So, you know, it may be worth either turning it off altogether or switching to a low contrast, a high contrast background, so that you can get a better view of what's going on in the screen as you're flying. It also means that you can turn down the brightness of the screen, and your LED lighting on your screen is the main power hog in your device. So if you can run it a bit dimmer, then batteries are going to last a bit longer. Now, each of these info boxes can be set up individually. There's an enormous number, well, it's about 130 of them, and I'm not going to try and go through them all. What I might do, JB, in his enthusiasm, bought the club 10 Dell computers, or 6 or 8 or something Dell computers, to be able to have them for the various club aircraft. And we did go through at one stage and have a look at what would be needed to, what would be the optimum configuration for setting this up. And this is what he came up with. Now, let me go back to... Now, before it didn't come onto this screen, but because I've now loaded, oops, better put you back on it, I guess. Before, because there weren't any choices, it went straight into the startup screen. But now I've added various configuration possibilities. I did it by copying some files across. And this will be the second screen you see after you open XCSoar. So you can set up different configurations for different aircraft or for different sites. Now in this case, well, didn't want that. Yeah. try again. And share it again. Right, you got XCSoar back again, I presume. So now we've got various configurations. So we'll choose Bacchus Mask GGC. Now we've got various info boxes set up, which are the ones that JB felt would be basically reasonable for someone that's just doing badge flying. With the various screens, as you're in various modes of flight, this is the cruise screen. You can see down at the bottom right hand of the map, there's a flat little silhouette of a glider. That tells us that we're in the cruise screen. And because we're not flying, it won't actually, yeah, I might actually leave this. I'll do it later on when we're actually going through a flight, going through the various waypoint, the various info boxes that we've got. So where are we up to? So we're going to close that. And go back to we should be back on the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Where you can find out all about all of this, you might have seen as I was going through the various setups, most of them have a help button, and it's very brief, the information that's provided, but there is information provided there that can help tell you what's going on. The manual is pretty heavy going, but the information will be in there if you go looking for it. Unfortunately, the forum, I couldn't seem to get onto it. I think it's still around, but you really have to be a developer these days to be able to get into it. And lastly, the mailing list, where you can, which is basically, again, another bulletin board type format. You can get onto it, but it's, you know, in the past 4 years, 5 years, there hasn't been that much added to it. But I guess it would have the information from previously from people that are wondering. Now, David asked me to talk a little bit about putting the device into your glider. And the first thing you're going to need is a mount. There's a few of the practical issues. As far as I'm concerned, the RAM mounts, which you've seen around, are probably the simplest and best. I haven't come across anything that's really quite as effective, and they're reasonably priced. The features that you need, it needs to be able to mount the device fairly securely, but at the same time protected against some of the bouncing around that goes on with the takeoff run and all the rest of it. Yeah. The RAM mount has a bit of a rubber ball which acts as a bit of shock absorbency. It has to be mountable, so you're not obstructing the controls, you're not obstructing the necessary instruments, and not obstructing the view out of the aircraft. And at the same time, it has to mount the device where its GPS antenna has view of the sky. Now if in Victoria, Johnny Appleseed, who are over in St Kilda, they've only got a small shop front there and a small storeroom at the back, but they seem to have everything there. That's where I tend to go to get the various bits and pieces. In Geelong, all our gliders have a ram mount fitted in them, and we've gone for the B-size one, the smaller one. It's good for 2 and a bit kilograms, which is heavier than anything we're going to be using. And they come in quite a few various types of setups. You can round base, or just a bolt that you can bolt on the instrument panel, or diamond shapes, the threaded ones that you can put a bolt around the back of. Find a spot. If there's an empty instrument hole, you can put a plate in there and mount something on it. A lot of people use suction mounts. In Geelong, we won't allow their use. They're not recommended. The rubber can react with the perspex where it's mounted onto the perspex. It can deform it. It can craze the perspex underneath. The weight of the device on an arm like that has quite a leverage force on the actual perspex, and you can delaminate the perspex from the frame at the edge. So for that reason, they're banned on club gliders in Geelong. I don't know about others. We do on the Junior, there's a silver stainless steel disc on the side of wall of the cockpit, which is designed that people can stick a suction mount on if you want to. Again, if gliders have got an empty instrument hole, then there's no reason you can't put a piece of perspex in there. Maybe paint the back of it so you can't get distractions through the perspex, and mount a suction mount onto that. But in the club, in our club gliders anyway, it's pretty relevant because all of them have got the base mounted in them. The other end of you need something to attach to the actual device, and most people end up getting these X-grip things. They're just sprung levers that close in on either side of your device. In this case, you've got bits of perspex indicating the device. Come in various sizes, up to and including your Samsung tabs or your Lenovo tabs if you're flying with something that size. Some of them even have Qi chargers in them like that. I'm not sure whether that type of charger would cause interference with instruments. It's an inductive charger, so they're well shielded, but I'm not sure that I'd encourage people. You can try it. The other thing you'll need would be an arm to join the two together, and they come in various sizes. So the short one would be pretty useless for most, but the medium and the longer ones are okay. In our club, it's up to the pilots to supply their own mount. There's no reason you can't use if your phone has a mount supplied, you can buy a B ball and just mount it on the back of it and connect up that way. Now, back again. Once you've got the device actually fitted in there, the next problem is you need to run it with power. The average phone probably has 2.5 ampere hour battery, something like that, sitting in it, which when you're running with the backlighting on the whole time, particularly if it's on fairly bright level, then you get a run out of power within an hour or two. One of the simpler ways, I guess, is to get one of these power packs, which you'll fit in the cockpit pocket pretty well, and just run a connection between those. They've got the advantage you can move it from aircraft to aircraft. You do have to recharge them, obviously, and there's always the risk you put it in there uncharged. And being lithium batteries, there's always concern about fire risk involved with them. Again, you could get USB power supplies, either avionic approved ones or non-approved ones. And again, all our club gliders have a USB output in them. The disadvantage of these ones is that they do rely on the glider battery, and your phone can put a fair drain on the battery, particularly if you start the flight with the phone uncharged. If you charge it up fully, then the drain's fairly small. But if you put an uncharged phone onto one of them, you'll drain about a third of the glider reserve if you've got a single battery. I don't think the Junior has one of those fitted in it yet, but the rest of them do. If you're thinking about fitting your own, make sure you fit some RF interference suppression, these chokes that fit over the wiring right up close to the back of the device. You want to look for a device that's got a fairly high efficiency. That means it's not going to generate too much in the way of heat. Ideally one that's shielded and you can actually try it out and hold it near instruments while it's running and see if it's generating any interference with them. The last thing you basically want is some form of shade, or may want is some form of shade over the device. The contrast on these devices is pretty poor, so that's one way of actually improving it. I haven't seen much in the way of commercial things, but there are various ways of making your own. My first one was just a plastic binder cover, cut to suitable shapes, and with a bit of the Velcro and cloth tape to reinforce the joins, made up a device that would fold up and form a cover. If you're good with a bit of woodwork and make up a plug, you can mould your own fiberglass one, or that's a couple of 3D printed ones, type of thing I use currently. Right. Now this is basically just running through the type of screens that you'll tend to see flying a simple task. So the startup screen we've already seen before. You go in there, you choose the appropriate profile. You may have various profiles set up for different aircraft, different pilots, different sites. Choose the appropriate one. And that's our starting screen. Now, when you first start the screen, you do need to run, well, I haven't actually got this on here. I'll go back to XCSoar. Come on, where's XCSoar? It's not coming up yet. I've got it on my screen, but it's not coming up as an option under sharing. Let me just close it and reopen it and see if it's reappeared. There we are. So you come in XCSoar. One of the things you can do with XCSoar, which is very easy, is gestures. So, for instance, a quick wipe up will zoom out, a quick wipe down, sorry, the other way around will zoom out, quick wipe up will zoom in. If you do an S, not fast enough. It'll come up with the status screen, which is not what I wanted. Config. You open config, open flight. It's just the basic things you need to set before you take off. So you can put in your ballast if you're carrying anything, Q&H, and set up bugs. Do you want me to go through a quick setting up a task?
Yeah, that'd be good, Jeff.
Again, choose Nav, task. It'll open here. This is where your task screen would be. Add turn point. In this case, it's going to be Bacchus Marsh. So BAC, and choose that. Oops, double click when I shouldn't. Add a turn point. So Dalesford. Add another turn point, Ballarat. So I'm choosing Dame. I could filter turn points on distance, direction, but I'm just choosing Dame. In this case, say Ballarat. Aerodrome. And turn point back to Bacchus. So Dame Bacchus. That's our task. Make it the finish, Bacchus Marsh. you need to set up what each the turn points are like. Now in this case, it's actually chosen a quadrant and a line, which would be reasonable things anyway. Alternatively, you could go into them and change the type if you wanted to. Just to click through them one by one and do that. Anyway, so that's our task set up. We close it and close again, and our task will be drawn on the screen. The other one that you need to really set is McCready. Now in this case, we've got various info boxes set up. These are the ones that JB suggested. If you double click McCready, or single click McCready, double click it in a glider, you can add or you can set up a figure. You can also set it up to auto, which will start with whatever you have chosen, but then it'll adjust it as you go through the flight. So if you're getting better than what you've set up, it'll build it up. If you've got worse, it'll lower it down. So looking at what we've got here, we've basically got the map. We've got a scale down the bottom left here, which is the width from the map from side to side. You've got various turn points, which are these 4-pointed stars. Various start points in this case mainly. And you have other airfields around. Now, because this is a cut file, it actually draws airstrips on it in the direction of the airstrips that are there, and also scales them slightly. So short airstrips, fairly short there. If it's a longer airstrip, it'll be marked. It'll go through the whole marker. We have a I'll probably cover that later actually. You can see in there we've got our start line marked off and the start zone around the actual starting point. This is with glider sitting on the ground. The various info points, the bearing for the next waypoint. In this case, we haven't started, so the next waypoint, turn point is Bacchus Marsh Aerodrome. The average start speed achieved. We haven't taken off yet, so it's 0. Nearest are the height required for the next waypoint. Yeah, they're alternative waypoint here. Waypoint arrival altitude. At the moment we're sitting on the ground, so it's got 518. And the distance to get there, distance to get home in this case actually, and height above ground level. According to this, we're 16 feet below ground level, according to what we was reading at the time on here. Let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Now, again, that was just showing you how to pick up the menu things. This was a different presentation I just put together. You've taken off and you've started thermaling. This is the screen that you'll see when you're thermaling. And the thermaling, you'll have this circling screen logo down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, a little bit different. It switches into this screen once it's detected that you're about 3/4 of the way around a turn. from the cruise screen which you were on originally. When it's you're circling, it'll work out where it thinks the centre of the thermal is. And this little bluey green thing in the middle here is where XCSoar feels your centre of your thermal is. Oops. I've got to be careful not to click the bloody thing. The thermal assistant is this thing down at the bottom left-hand side. And as you're flying around the circle, in this case, it's a right-hand turn, so we're on the left of the thermal. It's showing the profile of the lift. So the lift is higher at this point. By the time you come around to here, it's going to be a bit lower. By the time you come around to here, it'll be a bit higher. The grey arc here indicates where you're about to be going. The track can be marked behind the glider, and the colour in this case represents the lift at various points along that flight. This thing up in the left-hand corner is again the thermal profile. So at the bottom of the thermal, you are getting this much lift, but as you're climbing up through the thermal, it's showing the lift that you're getting at various heights. The width of the arrow here represents your McCready setting, which in this case, it's got up to 1.9 because of the we've been getting better climb than initially expected. The info boxes, the way they're set up here, they can change from screen to screen. In this case, the only info boxes that have changed is a total climb in the last 30 seconds. So the average climb in the last 30 seconds and the total gain of that thermal to date. The others are the same and common between the various screens in this setup, but everyone's different depending on what they do. You finish climbing and you start heading out on your task. And you start to get some additional information. This brown line around here, the fuzziness below it, that's the distance that you can travel before you hit the ground, or your terrain clearance in this case, since we have terrain clearance set. The final glide bar is this device over here on the left. It's got a clip on it, which means you've got more than 500 metres that you've yet to climb. In fact, it tells you you need 28,000 feet to climb to get around your task. Probably come back and tell you a bit more about that later when it shows more useful information. The solid arrow here is the optimal climb direction. The optimal bearing. You've got a wind indicator. Oops. Here, so we've got a wind of 19 knots coming up from the southwest. Again, thermal profile. You're currently in this part of your thermal profile. So our previous climb, we were here. It's died off a bit as we've gone further up. The various airfields, if you're within reach of them, they'll become green. If you're within reach of them, if you choose a lower McCready, they'll become orange. If you're out of reach of them, they'll be red. And in this case, we've also got airspace nearby. So that's also showing up in this case. If you click the airspace, it would tell you what's going on. Again, the little emblem down in the bottom right there tells us that we're in cruise mode. Here we started, we're approaching airspace. It tells us so the airspace has become matted out, and you'll get a klaxon warning sound you'll get sick of, and it'll come up with the information down at the bottom. So it's telling you you're approaching airspace, details of the airspace, and that you're going to hit it in 13 seconds at the current rate of climb or horizontal flight. You can ignore it if you know you're not going to go into it. It'll disappear after 30 seconds or so. You can acknowledge it, which means if you acknowledge it, it will not tell you about it again for this incursion into this airspace for this flight. If the urgency level rises, you're no longer in it, you're no longer near it, you're in it, it will notify you again. But otherwise it won't. Acknowledge it for the day basically means it ignores it for the rest of the your session with XCSoar, so you won't hear about it again. So unless it's something like Area Bravo, Area Alpha that's showing up and isn't available and it keeps warning you about it, then you can acknowledge it for the day and you won't be in any trouble, but otherwise be careful about it. Now in this case, apart from the airspace here, we've got a red CTAF airspace showing up around Ballarat Airfield. So it's telling us we're 3 degrees to Dalesford and 28 kilometres to go. And we still need 14,000 feet to get around our task at this stage, which we've done in the meanwhile. And we've come back, we've gone up to Dalesford, we've come back from Ballarat. And the final glide bar is now telling us that we have final glide on our target on Bacchus Marsh Airfield. The orange here says that in fact on our current McCready we don't have, we wouldn't get there, we'd get there with -7 feet. But if we decreased our McCready setting back down, then the green up here tells us that we would make it back to Bacchus Marsh. We've obviously got alternate airfields sitting around that we can land in. The final glide is a third screen with different info boxes again. And again, it has a different emblem down the bottom. So when you're in final glide, it will notify you that you're capable of doing final glide and switch to this screen. And that's notified by that emblem down the icon down the bottom. Again, in this setup, we've got 2 different info boxes. All the others are common to all the various screens in this particular setup. We've got the instantaneous gradient that we're getting at the moment, 19 feet down for 1 foot down for every 19 feet forward. And the final glide we need to get back to Bacchus, which is 20 feet. So hence saying we won't get back at the moment. We go a little bit further along and now we've got 2 green arrows heading up. So it's telling us we would get back to Bacchus Marsh with 29 feet to spare. But the arrow there says, but you're going to hit terrain before you get there. And if you go along and look along here, you can see that it says at this point you'll hit terrain clearance, which looks as though it's probably somewhere around Brock's front window. If you turn back down the McCready, then you've got all this up here that tells you you've got plenty of height to get back. If while you're flying around and you try to hit some of these controls, 9 times out of 10 you don't. You end up getting this screen instead. That's just listing the various elements that are in that screen at that point. So D383, danger area, if you actually hit that and ask for details, it'll give you information on it. If you hit Point Cook and ask for details, it'll give you information on Point Cook aerodrome. Good, I don't know how I got Point Cook on this one. Anyway, I don't think that was out of this particular flight. That's basically what you see when you're flying with the thing. Now, I've had this vital screen on all of these, so I've left it on here, though it's becoming less relevant. Electronics is fallible, things do go wrong, and legally we still have to have a map. XCSoar is not an approved device as far as CASA is concerned. If you have Oz runways on your Android, then maybe that is an alternative to a map these days, and that is approved by CASA. Yeah, I think that's everything on that one. Any of you that are still awake, do you have any questions?
Yes,
Or
Jeff.
do you want me to go through anything else? I've got various other flights I could go through if you want them to.
When you open it, you've got the sim option. Apart from going in and doing configuration, can you actually do simulation in it?
You can, but it's extremely crude. To go forward, you swipe through the glider in the direction you want to go. Now, the harder you swipe, the faster you go. To get height, you tap on the height above ground level info box and you set a height. Again, you could tap on the airspeed box and set your speed, or tap on the bearing box and set your heading if you want to. But it's an extremely crude simulator. It does replay, and obviously those ones that I took were just replays off a flight. And the replay is not bad. So that's, if you've got an IGC file, you can load it up and just play it through.
Right.
Right.
Thanks, Jeff. It's Christopher. My camera back on.
Jenny was after something, was she?
Yeah, I was. Thanks, Brett.